This is Phil Callahan's interview with Joe Blankenship. I couldn't find audio of this anywhere, so I figured I'll go ahead and record it and upload it on my channel. There are a lot of interesting things that are being said in this interview. After reading some of it and skimming through other parts of it, I think you guys are in for a real treat. Here it is. Phil Callahan's interview with Joe Blankenship, transcribed by Lee Bracker. Phil Callahan explains our world based on paramagnetism in an intense introspective discussion with Joe Blankenship. Topics include weak electromagnetic fields, World War II, and agriculture. Part 1. Joe and Marilyn Blankenship visit with Phil and Winnie Callahan at their home in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 2004. A few initial minutes of introduction are not captured on video. As if you just entered the room, you're instantly engaged with the conversation taking place. The content and dynamics of their time together is captured in this perfect example of both men's recollections of their lives and research. The transcription from videotape to print is an attempt to preserve the charm of their candid conversational style and is presented intact as much as possible. Where there is editing of words and phrases, it is only done for the purpose of clarity or to make sense. The decision was made to not interfere with the fluidity of the read, with indications as to where these modifications occur. Phil Callahan has published 18 books, many of them touched upon and shared in this visit. The transcription from video to print was completed late July of 2010 at the request of Joe Blankenship, whose aim is to carry Dr. Phil Callahan's legacy generations forthcoming. Enjoy the ride. Let me just make sure I'm recording. Yes, I am. Tape begins. Joe says, and cell phone exposure will sterilize eggs and they won't hatch. Bill Bailey, who worked for Motorola said, they don't sell many cell phones to chickens and peacocks. That was his answer to that, but we've still got them. I found that if you take a little Mobius and put it with a little magnetite in a disc and squeeze them, it disrupts direct EMFs. Tesla came up with this purple disc. I gave you one or two of them. They had the cobalt and aluminum in them, the yin and the yang. When you combine the disc and a little Mobius, it keeps the rays from penetrating the skull. To make it, the disc must be placed on a bed of granite and exposed to a high-voltage Tesla coil for about a day. We're putting them on a polar concentrator, 6.5 million cofactor. Phil takes out a small statue from his pocket. He took the Virgin Mary similar to this one and filled it with magnetite and sealed it. He hasn't had a problem again. I've got the Virgin Mary and filled it with paramagnetic rock. He holds up a small statue of the Virgin Mary from his pocket to show Marilyn. It works for the common cold, and I've never even had a sniffle. Joe says, the doctor, Marshall, I handed you his name here, is very concerned. I gave him a copy of the time you did the interview in Nexus magazine about the cancer that you had and other people and so forth. I also told him that you were able to successfully treat leprosy. I went into detail about it, and he is very interested in that. He's thinking that everyone that I have ever told about taking magnetite by spoonful think that it's an herb and it won't actually dissolve. It won't actually go in, but it's actually doing something. Phil says, as it goes into you, it puts energy into your body. It's a quick cure, actually. Joe says, a doctor in Tucson I was talking to, Dr. Best, bought an infrared box that people can get into and gave them the paramagnetics. They swallow it down and then get it in the box. Do you remember the fellow in Pink Polk, Florida, Roy Davis, with all these dogs? He had 200 dogs. Half of them had cancer and the other half were the control group. The half that he fed magnetite to and had sleep on magnetic beds all healed. Every one of the damn dogs. The others that were in the control group, every one of them died. Phil says, I played with chemicals that I had to synthesize for 6 years when I had a job at Louisiana State University and I got lung cancer. I cured it in less than a month. It was gone inside of a month by taking a teaspoon of magnetite. You told me about the pads you made. Pads. You told me about the pads you made that trace back to the Jewish tradition, Joe says. Phil says, yeah, the shatnez. Nobody knew the name of it until I met this 91-year-old rabbi. He said that it is the Jewish name for sackcloth and ashes. Sackcloth and ashes were not for penance. They were to heal leprosy. When they put sackcloth, hemp, and ashes on a leper, it would heal them. It did not have anything to do with penance. In the Bible, they had to do penance and they were healed. Joe says, that was a very important factor that you told me. In fact, I made hundreds of pads like that and I gave them to 2 hospices. The doctors would come along and throw them in the garbage can. The nurses would take them back out of the garbage can and give them to the patients. They said they used less narcotics. No sales. Phil says, of course. Joe, now I found you can benefit these by putting them in a plastic bag, seal them real tight, and put them in the freezer. Then, when they come back out, they slowly give off energy. This is a change in the CGS when they get back to ambient temperature. Phil, you actually have some movement. Joe, so that goes right back to Wilhelm Reich. Wilhelm Reich came to Tucson and had the orgone. I think orgone and paramagnetics are the same thing, Joe says. Ooh, that's interesting. Phil, of course, that was his name for it. He had to call it something. He didn't know a lot of physics and he had to call it something. So he called the energy orgone. But it is the same thing. Joe, now he wrote the book Pathology of Cancer and he got in trouble. That's when they put him in prison and he died just before his release date. Phil, they put him in jail. That was the American Medical Association doing. I never had much use for them and I still don't. They're as crummy as ever on something like this. It's all agreed. Joe, money. It's all about money. I've got another thing I have been playing with that I want to tell you about. I read Dr. Paul Langevin, where he put crystals between 2 plates and would tap them to get a coherent wave. When you were talking about the fellow that worked on the radio, you mentioned Langevin at one time. I had a hell of a time finding out about him. Langevin made sonar and radar by tapping crystals under pressure, so I made a bunch of stainless steel plates. I put these little magnetite balls in between them and squeezed them. They benefited plants. They benefited animals. Phil, plants grow like crazy. Joe, it's unbelievable. Now, I went a step further. I got a hold of a hyperbaric chamber from Bruce Halstead and brought it over to Tucson. It saved my brother's leg. My brother had diabetes. We put him in the chamber 3 or 4 times a week. Phil, paramagnetic oxygen. Joe, paramagnetic oxygen is what it was found. I found out with Langevin. I didn't have to put them in a steel plate. I mixed them with sodium silicate and put the stuff together in little balls. I squeezed them up like the holy balls in India. While they were still wet, I squeezed them under tremendously high pressure with the oxygen inside the chamber. They came out of that chamber active and alive. They have paramagnetism. These do not. Phil, they have oxygen, which is paramagnetic. Joe, they are paramagnetic, but these don't measure on the CGS meter as much as others. Phil, they feel warm too. Joe, they are always warm. There was an old con artist I met years ago in Florida who was selling oxygenated water. He called it Fountain of Youth water from silicon dioxide and ferrous oxide rich source. He made a lot of money, got into trouble with the federal government, moved to Hawaii and they found him over there. Then he moved to Vienna. He buys these balls from me. He's got them on the internet as cosmic balls. He sells these damn balls for $30 a piece and getting rich. I'm nearly giving them away. The balls do work. I put them in the skimmers of swimming pools, which helps to restructure the water. There is a Japanese guy named Dr. Masaru Emoto, as well as a few other people who have taken pictures of structured water until they chilled. Structured water after they chilled. When they chill it, you can see all these crystallizations and the beautiful forms. They are even talking to the water, and if they pray over it, the crystals are pretty. If they speak the words Adolf Hitler or rock and roll, the crystals go to hell. He also studied frozen water crystalline structure. Phil, it's funny how the human language puts negative words into things that are crummy. Joe, I spent a lot of time with Dr. Robert Ricketts, who was an orthodontist, a really bright man, and even went to Hawaii with him. He wrote a dozen really good books, which include hundreds of articles. He worked on Lauren Bacall's face by adjusting her jaw to make it perfect. He did a job on Sophia Loren too. Bacall goes on record condemning cosmetic surgery just to get an edge, but anyway, he used the golden ratio. He even made a simple adjustable measuring instrument that looks like a drafter's compass, but with the 3 legs instead of 2, to measure facial proportions relative to beauty. I've still got a handmade Fibonacci compass he gave to me. Ricketts was selling vitamins out of a company he had called Morganics Research, so we got into vitamin deals with him. I bought a sonar grinder. I got it from a copier toner company that went broke, who were grinding up the black iron to make the toner. I was selling them the iron they used for the toner. Well, that's pretty well controlled by large companies. There are just a few people who they allow to make money on it because they are getting $80 or $90 for a little tube. He was making it cheaper and they kind of squeezed him out. When he went bankrupt, I bought the $40,000 sonar grinder for a fraction of its value. So Morganics Research was coming down, and the old man was having me grind up his vitamins and minerals because they retain the crystalline structure. When you beat or grind them and then blend them all together, the integrity of the individual crystal is lost. So now I'm taking quartz and grinding them this way. That's what this Dr. Marshall from Roundtree Research in Texas told me. I have people all over the world coming by 2 or 3 days a week. I don't even have a telephone at my lab. I have people from Germany and China finding me. The natural form of gold is unaltered and alive, organic if you like, until arsenic, mercury, and radium come into contact and kills it. You know, arsenic can be neutralized using magnetite. I've got no formal education nor credibility in all this. It's the things that I am telling them and about what you know. They should sell a bunch of your books. Anyway, I think this is your greatest work you have ever written. Phil, I'm going to write another one pretty soon. Joe, I'm real into it. Now, Christopher Bird, he died. I went to his funeral where about 200 people showed up. I didn't know he had a twin either, and when his brother came in, I tell you, that was a jolt. Phil, I saw a picture of his brother once and they look exactly the same. Joe, he showed up at the funeral in Georgia. He's doing a book, but bird books are not well known. People would be healthier if these books were read. The world ignores him, even today. Anyway, he had it down to about the last chapter. His wife, Shauna, I don't know if she's ever going to do anything with the book, but I would like to get his manuscript from her and let you finish the last chapter. Phil, sure, I would be glad to do it. He was working on that book back when I knew him, back when I taught in Pittsburgh. He had it about half written then. Joe, I read the whole book. I went all the way through it. I am down to the last chapter or so, and it's a really good book. I can't think of anyone in the world that could do a better job of finishing it than you. I think it would outsell his Secrets of Plants, Secret of Soil, or his dowsing book. The water book with your paramagnetic paramagnetic could save the whole damned world. Phil, yeah, I could finish it. Joe, I'll tell Shauna about it. Now, the same thing happened with Dr. Benza in Canada. Benza was working on what he called Pima water. It was photonic implemented agua. He was taking iron oxide, putting it in silicon dioxide Pyrex tube and shooting it with a laser through Pyrex, and then let the water run over it. He was doing a real good sanitation job using this process. He fine-tuned it enough that he could actually take salt out of water. Phil, I don't know why I don't know why conventional scientists will not pick up on anything like that. It's too way out for them, but it works. They are beginning to use lasers for a few things like that. Joe, I'm getting old, but I'm going to try to make it up to Alberta and see if I can get his wife make to take his last notes and see if I can get someone like you and revise his last notes. Phil, she's still alive? Joe, she's still alive. She was a lot younger than us, you know, this old man, don't you? I'm slowing down and have to go faster to get our of reverse. To get our of reverse. It's hell getting old. So much yet to discover. Phil, yeah, I know the feeling too well. Joe, Benza used the electron microscope and measured things. He was doing the same thing that Reich and Rife were doing. And so was Gallant Nazion in Canada. Dr. Benza's work is so real, like the reality of paramagnetics. Joe, Wilhelm Reich started all of his stuff, but he wasn't a physicist, so he didn't know much about what he was doing. Funny, it always worked. Joe, well, if it works, why change it? These people went into optic electron microscopes, and you went into pinhole camera. Every one of these people that I ever talked to, including Christopher Bird, all believed in dowsing. Phil, sure, you have to. They would be crazy if they didn't. Joe, they would not go talking to the outside public without that. Ben Arbogast, a retired realtor from Tucson, he called here every once in a while. He's looking for treasure and that kind of stuff, but I'm looking for things that heal. We took the iron oxide and mixed it with lignits and then set it near plants. They registered 800 to 900% more vitamins and minerals. Phil, that's how it works. If you put paramagnetism in your body, it makes all your vitamins and everything else work 10 times better. You'll never get sick. Joe, well, this doctor who's in trouble in New York is a medical doctor doing a different treatment for cancer. He was taking aloe vera, magnetizing it with various other things, and then injecting the aloe vera juice right into the cancer with success. He got in trouble for breaking the Feinstein Act, cancer, cut, and burn therapies. He'll get jailed some way. He'll get jailed same way Jerry Vale did. Phil, they never could get me on that because they're afraid of me. I had way too much proof. Joe, I think they think they're going to outlive us both. You've come out a time or two. I used to ask you a question and you would say, Joe, you're going to get us both in Alcatraz. Phil, they're afraid of me. That's the problem. Proof. Joe, Ben has run into some of these measuring devices that he's playing around with. He's talking to some of these people that he has run into at dowsing meetings. He's coming up with a Bovis measurement. What do you think of Dr. Bovis? Phil, Antoine Bovis goes back to the wine industry, measuring sugar content of grapes. It helped them make better wine and more of it. He did energy research on the Great Pyramids in the 30s. Joe, it goes all the way back to Bosie in India. Phil, he was a famous physicist. Joe, he was first and right on. He has been responsible for saving millions of people in India, even has a world-recognized university named after him. The man studied the stars. Bosie was knighted by the Queen of England. Phil, yeah, he got recognized by the Queen. Joe, he was very good. They have some of his books at the University of Arizona special collections, but they won't let me copy him. They said the copier would fade them. Phil, the copier passes ultraviolet light and they're afraid to use old manuscripts on the copy machine. Joe, so I have hand copied a lot. He was using a Wheatstone bridge. He came pretty close to your machine 100 years before. Phil, his was a CGS instrument, but more primitive because they didn't have the transistors back then. They probably could have made a better one if they used mica and peanut vacuum tubes. They had them back then. The first one I made used peanut tubes. They were regular tubes, but small. I made one in World War II. I just got a call from the CIA last week. I'm going to get regulation for my work. That surprised me 60 years later. Joe. Halstead. They put him in jail for his cancer therapies, but once he got in, they made him start working on the CIA and Naval Strategic Service for big weapons. They were taking these poisons from poisonous and venomous plants and fish and mixing them with DMSO. They asked him how to kill honeybees. I have lots of his notes. One of the things he was working on during the last part of his life when he was taking the frequencies of the poisons and recording them on discs and broadcasting them beneath the regular food. The wrong frequency based on the poison was enough to kill a person. Phil. Sure, frequencies is what kills. You can make a frequency to kill anybody. Joe. All good things can be reversed. Reich called orgone two ways. Beneficial orgone that we are familiar with and detrimental orgone that would pass bad vibes. Phil. Sure. Joe. Do you realize what this could do to the medical profession with aspirin bottles and other things? If you put arsenic or cyanide in the frequencies, plus you would never even break the bottle. Phil. No, you would put the toxic frequency in the aspirin and they would never figure out how you were killed. Joe. Now, Halstead here, during the last part of his life, was using oil of camphor and camphor spirits with DMSO. He was rubbing them right on the lymphatic lymphatic glands. He was getting tremendous results. The last part of his life, he was injecting them directly into the tumors and he was stimulating the immune system right where the cancers were. Halstead mixed some finely ground magnetite with hydrogen peroxide and injected it right into the area. Finally, he was using DMSO as the vehicle to absorb it through the skin. Phil. There are a lot of doctors who surreptitiously discover cures. Most doctors, when they read my book, they say, yeah, that's great. If they go ahead and do it, they won't let the American Medical Association know it, of course. It's never widespread knowledge. Joe. When the FDA ordered his DMSO handbook burned, I went over there before they did and collected all the hard and soft book copies, plus everything else I could. I got several of his unpublished books out of there. They would have been forever lost. Phil. Halstead was an incredible man. It's a shame the world won't see that body of work. Joe. What is so magical about camphor? Phil. Camphor is a plant. It's a scent, actually. It's like perfume healing. The scent has valuable healing properties like frankincense, and myrrh. Of course, the perfumers know that. A lot of them are doing research on different kinds of perfumes that help people treat diarrhea and other conditions. Joe. Halstead had a whole file on camphor. He said camphor is the main ingredient in Tiger Balm that comes from China. Phil. Yeah, Tiger Balm is mostly camphor. Joe. It's tremendous. It's big business all over the world, particularly in Asian countries. Phil. People in the old days, women used to buy camphor and rub it on their knees for arthritis. Camphor was used in all of the old healing. Then, all came chemical healing, which is poison-based. It kind of did away with all the natural healing. But it's coming back now. The natural healers are licensed in some states. Joe. There are so many people making money in alternative medicine that now a record number of doctors have adopted the practice of recommending second opinions in their office to get in the money. Phil. They're finally coming along with them for the money. That's what does it. There's a lot of money in alternative medicine. Allopathy is a form of legitimizing murder. Joe. Andrew Weil is in Tucson. He was Harvard trained in medicine, but he saw the importance of alternative medicine, so he got into it. He is making a lot of money selling a little newsletter. Every month he turns out a newsletter that costs $14 or $15 a year, and he has 3 to 4 million people a year subscribing to it. I'm not sure you ever thought about it, but you can put together 1 million little pamphlets of all the things you have done. Phil. Yeah, I never was interested in money too much. I don't guess. Money just comes to me when I need it. Joe. The same with me. And when something works, I go do something else. I just can't stay in one thing. It drives Marilyn crazy, but that's me. It's a sort of dis-ease of mine. I lose interest if it's not making any money. I wish I was a little more business-minded. Phil, I can't either. Once I solve something, I want to go on to some. Sorry, there's a motorcycle going by. Sorry about that. Phil, I can't either. Once I solve something, I want to go to something else and try to solve it. That's the problem with life. Just keeping ahead. I'm probably going to write a book before too long, and it's going to be a hodgepodge of all the things that I have solved. Joe, I think that would be great. Just a bathroom book, just a page or two at a time. The last time I saw Christopher Bird alive was in Sedona. He called me and said, "I'm going to be in Arizona." I said, "When?" He said, "I'm going to go through Sedona. Joe, I don't feel like going down to that hot country where you are." I said, "I'll come up there." So I went up there and spent 3 days with him at Pocaloca. We spent a lot of time together and we talked a lot about you. Your ears were probably burning. He said that you were one of the human beings that write things that a layman could read, or even a kid's coloring book. They'll read anything. They don't discriminate, and because the technology of truth is so simple, it's interesting to them, which carries on through a lifetime. Phil, that's the only way to do it, really. Joe. He said the profession wants to talk in riddles. You are just too frank and too many people can understand what you're saying. I mentioned that people don't read complete books anymore, and what about putting the information in little pamphlets? He said he thought that was the coming thing. Phil, that's what I'm doing now. I'm going back into all this stuff and doing pictures with it. What I learned from the Montauk project, what I learned from the Philadelphia experiment, and what I learned from the interplane wing strut. What I learned from the B-26 I flew in World War II when I was decorated, and learned from airplanes. The Wright brothers were incredible people. They weren't super educated either. Phil. They were just bicycle mechanics. One of them saw a piece of paper flying through a barrel one time, and that was the beginning of the wind tunnel. He got a barrel and made a wind tunnel. That's how they built their glider. Joe, there's something I wanted to ask you about. William Lear believed there were UFOs in contact in the country. So did Wilhelm Reich. Phil. So do I. Joe, you do? I never talked to you about this. I know 2 or 3 people who were high in the military and checked the Roswell incident. I took Wilhelm Reich over to Roswell. He and I went over and looked at it. He talked to the rancher and all of the people who were close to this stuff. It was real, and there were eyewitnesses. Phil, it was real for sure. The rancher wouldn't lie. He knew that. He knew what he saw. Joe, we talked to all the people when Wilhelm Reich came back. He believed that this country got a lot of data for engineering, for switches, computer chips, optic fibers, etc. from ETs. He believed they back-engineered this stuff and credited the people they wanted to credit. They got a lot of data out of the exchange. Dr. Einstein got the Nobel Peace for light optics. Phil, I don't doubt that transistor came straight from Roswell. No doubt about it. What was the guy's name who invented penicillin? Fleming? He got his ideas from what they found at Roswell. It wasn't mold on bread because the old Jewish rabbis used moldy dry bread and charcoal as remedies. They were smart. Actually, there is a big round spot of radioactive decay there. There was a lot of this magic dirt. This one guy called it. It souped up the silver so that it could be used for all kinds of means. I think the transistor came out of that. The transistor is made of silicone doped with iron oxide or doped with radium arsenide. One or the other. You can build them, I'm sure. I'm writing up memoirs now because I got the promise of getting the Medal of Honor for what I did in World War II. All I did to survive was to take a little peanut tube and powered it with paramagnetic rock. Joe, I took paramagnetics and made my first radio. I took nothing but copper wires and carbon chips. I had a lot of trouble keeping it on a station. I put it together. I found if I put it on a bed of magnetic iron oxide of sand, it worked even better. Phil, that's the old crystal set that came along when I was a boy. I made my first crystal set when crystal sets came out. They were nothing but nonlinear transistors. You had to search around for the right point. Joe, it went all the way from that to a vacuum tube, and then it went back to that again. Phil. It went a complete circle back to the crystal. It's all crystal now. Everything is transistorized now, like that picture of the Pyramid of Malcolm. I went to a pyramid named Malcolm's Nest. There was a whole limestone cliff, which is diamagnetic. In the pyramid, you will find some other rock that was brought in that was paramagnetic. There's always paramagnetics. If they couldn't find it locally, they would bring it in. Joe, Halstead told me that in every bird, every homing pigeon, there's a small amount of magnetite in the brain. He told me that if they put a tiny magnet on the top of the brain of the bird becomes lost. He had a degree in toxicology as well as oceanography, in addition to medicine. He believed these whales that came in, they are getting disoriented because the magnetism they were getting has been degaussed. Phil, yes, they become sick or something, and it degaussed the magnetism in their brain. They don't know where they're going, so they come ashore. There's no question about that. Joe, there is a man who went to Sweden years ago and brought a bunch of magnetite back. He breaks it up into little pieces and puts it in little things for people to wear around their neck. He calls it North Star. He has been selling these chips for $50 for 3 years. There's just a little tiny chip in there. He sells them to change people's appearance, makes them feel better, makes them feel healthier. He says it makes them lucky at gambling and that crap. Phil, it won't help with gambling, but it will make them feel better when they lose their money. Joe, yeah, it made them feel better after they lost their money. Phil, you can't win on gambling. The casinos have it set up so you can't win. Joe, they have a mathematical certainty there. I had a friend who used to work for the airlines. He said they had crashes. He said they had crashes that would come out around Las Vegas and the other places up there. They had to guard the planes as they were coming in because people had a lot of money on them. When a plane went down and people were going out of there was no one and anything left, not even wristwatches. Phil, I was talking to a casino guy one time who told me some guy came in there thinking he was smart. He was also looking for magnetism. He could just come in with paramagnetic rock and mess them up. Joe, they have spent fortunes. The Ross Club spent about $500,000 to try to give the people a false sense of security, to make them feel good. They experimented with lights. They found that blue and green lights were out. Phil, they made you too energetic. Joe, gold tuned people down. They also found that they could put magnetite in various different papers and around the place and found that people were calmer. One thing that Bobo and Mike Shell did was experimentation for NASA. You remember when John Glenn went up, then retired with what was called a magnetic deficiency. He busted his head falling down, etc. They found out that all the astronauts that go up now have magnetic oxide in their suits in order to keep down the deficiency. Linemen who are working on high voltage electricity, now they are incorporating magnetic iron oxide in their clothing. Phil, they all wear a Shatnez now. It is a paramagnetic vest. It stimulates the immune system. It gets your immune system so high that nothing can touch you. Like I said, just carry a paramagnetic rock in your pocket and you would be healthy all your life. Joe, once I got your CGS meter on the Arizona rock, that I could go where the quartz and the magnet run together. It went around at eddies, where the waters would turn and the heavy parts would fall out. I would mine the stuff right there. Sorry, there's other cars going by. They're pretty loud. I'm sorry about that, guys. At that point, I could get every single one of them and put them in the meter, and they would be 19,000 plus. Sure, Phil said. Sure. Well, the meter only went up to 40 or something. Joe, it came by the number 10. The last one that came by said 10 magnification. I got a couple of those. I had to clean off the tape before I got that one. Phil, the first one only went up to 2,000. I got calls back from people, especially out here where the soil is 2,000. They couldn't hardly use it because it was already at 2,000. So I had to redesign it and bring it up to 40,000 or whatever it is now. I hadn't had any trouble changing. I didn't have any trouble changing. I got an electro engineer who just switched the LED circuits in it. The biggest commercial meter cost $6,000. They said it was because it was so hard to wind the coils. I found that you could send to Germany and get the coils wound for $50 each. Joe. The first one I ever saw was from Patrick Flanagan. He bought it from some German company. He had $6,000 in it. When I got one of yours, it was better than his. Phil. Mine was a lot better than the commercial ones. Bob Pike was an engineer. He took my circuit design and put it together perfectly. Joe. Christopher Bird did a story on this. The last thing he was going to do, he was going to put together a water filtration deal. He believed that paramagnetics was the answer to water. Phil. When was the date of that trial? Joe. I've got it all at home. Phil. I would have been there and done those people in. Joe. I believe you would have. Bruce Halstead gave me that out of his own library. He signed his name. Phil. He signed it. That is great. This is great. This is from a private library. Let's see what the date is on it. Private library, 1991. That's over 10 years ago. I knew it had been out for quite some time. Joe. He incorporated paramagnetics in some of the things he was doing. In the last part, he believed that by using DMSO, paramagnetics, and camphor, you can stimulate the immune system from the outside of the skin to the inside. You didn't have to inject anything. Phil. You didn't have to inject anything because the DMSO goes directly into your skin. Joe, the last thing Halstead did was introduce oxygen to DMSO to oxygenate it. When he oxygenated it, it took the taste away and it didn't have the crappy taste. They changed it to MSM. I'm going to take a sip of water, so forgive me. I'm going to take a break for 2 seconds. 1 second here. Okay. Phil, I can take this paramagnetic dirt and put it in something that tastes real lousy, and it would come out tasting good. It always switches it from a bad taste to a good one. Joe, I can take water and put it inside the hyperbaric chamber, bring it up to 3 atmospheres, and leave it there overnight. When you cap the water and take it out, it is living water. Phil, the ancients knew a lot about this as a healing thing. All the old stone circles and stone structures, I need to write a book about them because I have photographs of them. I have copies of the stone structures. They're all around. Joe, when you put a person in the hyperbaric chamber, it is an iron chamber. You are getting the Orgone effect too. You can take the magnetic iron oxide crystal laid in the sun, a pad of them, and put them inside the chamber with you, with quartz crystals in those, and let the sun change them, or charge them rather. I found out when you take them out of there, you always have to put them under an ultraviolet light to get off any sweat or anything that's coming off of the person. It could smell real bad because you sweat. You put them back in the chamber with them and raise it and let them breathe pure oxygen. Man, you've got them going. Phil, it makes them smell sweet again. Joe, what do you think about putting people on a teaspoonful of magnetite or a few capsules of magnetite before you put them in the chamber? Phil, I think that would probably triple or quadruple the effect of the chamber. Paramagnetism amplifies whatever is good and kills whatever is bad. Whatever poisons are in your body, it does away with, and whatever is good, it enhances. It enhances all the vitamins in your body. But if you have some arsenic from the soil or something that's not good for you, it gets rid of it. If you go back and read the old literature, you begin to understand that Easter Island, where the big statues are, those are healing statues. The body is a natural antenna. The statue is a natural antenna. You can put a small amplifier on it and put up a radio signal a lot better than you can with a metal antenna. The statue is like a natural antenna. Joe, that doctor from Japan, Higgins' friend, has found the structured water. Your mind can structure the water. Dr. Torrey told me that your mind has to be present and you have to have the right thoughts in order to structure the water. There is a doctor in France. at the Pasteur Institute whose name was Jacques Benefice. He wrote a book on water called The Memory of Water. Phil, I've heard of that book. Joe, I spent 10 days with him in Hawaii where we talked about this for a long time. It got to where he can speak pretty good English. We got along really good, really well. He was telling me that when you magnetize the water can take on its memories. But if you distill the water and it is completely dead, then you don't have the living properties of the water. Phil, that's right. If you distill it, there is nothing in it. It's just pure H2O, and it's not what nature had in mind. Water is filled with minerals and vitamins and many other things. If a butterfly wants to live a long time, it stops at a muddy puddle. And takes a drink. You'll always find butterflies all along the country where it's drying out and there are mud puddles filled with butterflies. Joe, but you won't find them drinking the water that's in the stream. Phil, no, they won't drink the stream water at all. They will always drink from the mud puddles. They won't go near a clear stream. Joe, like the people in India, the pregnant women that take these little mud balls. Phil, well, not so long ago, my mother, who died at 89, was really quite healthy. During her pregnancy, she would go dig some clay out of the garden and eat it. She was part Indian. That's why we are shaped the way we are. My ancestors found New Mexico, San Juan. He was the first governor of New Mexico. Joe, a few years back, we did the whole De Anza Trail. Phil, that was my great-great-grandfather. Everybody said, well, he wasn't even married. Well, of course not. He had a couple of Indian spouses and didn't bother getting married. He was quite a character. He was a colonel in the Spanish army that came over to Mexico. He came up to the Anza Trail to settle in Santa Fe. He's my great-great-great-grandfather. Joe, those pressurized balls, I call them the Langevin balls because Paul Langevin is the one that actually showed you how. If you want to put them under pressure, you just dry them. I use Pascalite clay as the binder. I place a drop of sodium silicate in a disc that's laying on an angle, going around and around. That's why they're different sizes. Then I drop the magnetite and I have been sonically grinding saphites that I got from India. I get them at the rock show in Tucson. I grind them up and mix them in it. That makes them really hard, or very hard. If you take a ball like that and rake it across glass, it will score it like a diamond. Phil, I take paramagnetic rock and mix it with Elmer's glue to bind it. The glue is diamagnetic and the rock is paramagnetic, so you have the perfect medium. Joe, Elmer's glue is a hoof glue, isn't it? Phil, yeah, Elmer's glue is made out of hooves. It's made out of horses' hooves. They used to use horses for dog food and the hooves for glue. Joe, so you get the yin and the yang. Phil, you have got the yin and the yang. Elmer's glue is one of the best things to make anything. You can mix paramagnetic rock with Elmer's glue and make statues. Joe, if you took a magnetite, a little bit of quartz and Elmer's glue, and painted over a house, you would actually have a Faraday cage, wouldn't you? Phil, yeah, that's exactly what this is. Phil scratches the wall. It's slightly paramagnetic, so this house is a real energetic house. It's very relaxing. Joe, it's a Faraday cage. This is something I didn't tell you. The old Spaniards, when they were making the adobes, they killed animals, and what they do is lure them in with salt licks. When they killed the animals, they would take the blood and mix it with the adobes. Now you have a paramagnetic adobe block. Phil, there's all of the round towers in Ireland. If you go back and read about the monks in ancient Latin, they always mixed the cement with oxen blood. They would take 6 or 7 oxen to build a round tower and slaughter them to make it all into the mortar. Those towers are sitting on the ground with no foundation or anything and have been standing there for 1,500 years. There are still 40 of them left. Most of them have been struck by lightning. There were originally about 150 of them. 40 remain in perfect condition. They have been sitting on the ground with no foundation or anything for that long. Joe, it's almost anti-gravity, isn't it? Phil, anti-gravity, it is. The force of the paramagnetism in the oxygen reacts with the force of the paramagnetism in the earth. Joe, so in earthquake country, if you poured your foundation with magnetite in it, it would never fall. Phil, it would never fall. There are tower houses. There are tower houses in Japan and also in Ireland and England which would be damaged by in earthquakes, but the tower houses would never fall. Joe, what if they took those piers and what if they took these piers and the bridges and put a shell around the outside of them using magnetite impregnated cement? Phil, it would make it a lot stronger. It would stand up a lot better in an earthquake. That's what they should do in San Francisco. Joe, I was looking for gold in Brazil and ran into Bruce Halstead, who was there looking for green medicine. You, however, were down there just for the pure science aspect. Phil, yeah, I was just down there learning about the headhunters. I already knew a little bit about them, but I learned a lot more about them. They were well aware of paramagnetism. They had a magic word for it. They knew all about it. Joe, some of those women down there knew all about poisons. Phil, oh, go. Yeah, they had drugs down there. They could take drugs out of a plant and you wouldn't know what it was. Joe, have you ever noticed how the men treat their women when they all know about when they all know of those poisons? Yeah. Phil says yes. Joe, they treat them real nice. No one is beating anyone. That's funny. Phil, they have great respect for their women. There is none of the tribal stuff that goes on with some tribes where women are second rate. With the headhunters, the women are equal with the men. The men consider them their equals. The ones I knew were called the Ashiari, and they were remarkable. I guess I was the first one to ever come across them. I came across them at the Hagramona River, which means river of the tapers, or tappers. I got in the canoe. My wife never worries about me, but everyone else was telling her, he's not going to come back, he's not going to come back. She just laughed. She thought it was funny. She knew darn well I was coming back because the headhunters were the friendliest people. In fact, they were over-friendly. They couldn't do enough for you. They were so friendly it was nauseating. They were always around you, doing something for you. Joe, I told his wife one time about you, and they were a very even-tempered person. I never seen you get mad. She said you just make your card out. Just mention Monsanto to him. Phil, yeah, they have probably done more to destroy people in this country than anyone else. They're a big corporation. Joe, what do you think about these new genes they're trying to make, calling them Terminator seeds? Phil, all that research is just funded by the devil, is what it is. There is a devil, and it is funded by the devil. It's evil spirits in Indian literature. Joe, you take a picture one time of a little old man or woman praying in the church with the light rays coming through the window that bent. I never could understand what bent. Phil, well, the light coming through travels in a straight line, but it's traveling through oxygen. When people get into a meditative state, they become so highly paramagnetic it pulls the oxygen down. It's interesting. The only way you can see light is if it has particles in it. So light has to have particles of dust, which means the light beam carries paramagnetic properties. You cannot see a laser beam if there is no dust or smoke in the air. So the dust or smoke, or whatever it is paramagnetic. So when someone starts praying, it kind of bends it down. There is a scientific explanation for all of this stuff. What the ancients called magic is a science. Joe, what do you think about all of these paintings of saints depicted with auras around their bodies? Do you think that it's paramagnetic? Phil, yeah, sure it is. They are so close to God that their brains actually give off photon coherent light. Because it is coherent, it is real bright. You'll notice that although it is painted as yellow in pictures, it is never really yellow. It is white. It is perfectly white as this wall. It is pure rays of white light. Joe. This lady that was in India, Mother Teresa, she came to Phoenix, and I went up and looked at her. I don't know if it was just me or the way the light was, but it looked like she had a radiance around her. Phil. Yeah, I met her assistants, and the assistants had the same sort of radiance around her. She had a blue and white gown on. Joe. The Dalai Lama comes to Tucson every once in a while. He has a field or two or three of the people around him that are real close have it. Phil. Where is he living? Joe. Well, he stays in California a lot. He has a colony in Tucson at Catalina, and they come through. He was very close to a fellow that did a lot of research on raised monkeys and imported all the raised monkeys during the test. His name was Tom Slick. Have you ever heard of Tom Slick? He owned the Flying Tigers and the young general. He was killed in a plane crash, but he was working on this paramagnetic iron with me for a while he was alive. I got $1,000 a month every month to experiment to teach with it. We got very close. Phil. He was quite a nice guy. I didn't realize he was killed. Joe. He was killed in a plane crash just outside of Phoenix. The thing I handed you there on the last part was a little bit about us when he was working in Tucson. Phil. He was a stunt driver. Joe. He did a little of everything. He was a wealthy old man on his own. He would have a big circus tent down in Dallas, and he would invite all kinds of nutty people. They would come in, and he would have his secretary go around and take notes on what they were talking about. There were some real nuts. They were some guys who were going to build boats made out of ice. They were really way out. Phil. They had a big party, and everybody was drinking, and there was all kinds of good food. Joe. He was a sort of lesser well-known Hogwarts Hughes. You've got a couple of hummingbirds that went right by the window. Phil. Yeah, we have a feeder out there. They had for it. Joe. Halstead was into birds when he died. He had probably 50 different birds, big birds in cages from all over, including South America. The kids divided them up and took them to other places. They made a lot of noise, and I don't know if any of them survived. I think there were a few in the cage at the center. He never got into computerization. He did all his work by longhand and typed things out. Phil. That's like me. I've never used a computer. Joe. He has hundreds of thousands of things on record that he has done in his lifetime. Every time I go there, I take $400 or $500, and they let me take anything out that I want to copy. I've copied everything on HBO, hyperbaric oxygen. I've copied almost everything they had on cancer. I've copied all of Royal Rife's stuff. I've copied all of the Gersten stuff. I've copied everything he had on the files. When he died, they're going to have a party or a yard sale. None of my kids are interested in any of that. I can't get any of them interested in it. They go to college, they get an education, and they're school teachers. And you know something, doctor? They will make a flip doing that, but the teachers aren't the teachers anymore. Phil. That's not true. My son is fascinated by this stuff. One of my daughters is too. She teaches English in Mexico City. She's fascinated by it. Joe. What's happening to the general public is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about everybody, my own kids. Phil. I don't know. It's TV. They put the same thing on. I sit there and watch TV, and after about 10 minutes, I get up and I come in here and start reading because it's the same thing over and over again. It's all violence. There's so much violence in this country. That's called imprinting. They are imprinting people with all of that. Joe, I think anyone who has ever read the complete works of O. Henry has seen every damn TV program that he has ever been on. Phil, yeah, there was no plot that he didn't plot. If you read O. Henry, you've got all of them. But on TV, it's the same thing over and over again. It gets boring watching it after a while. CSI is not too bad because it's a good detective story. They ought to go back to Sherlock Holmes. Joe, and yet he was on drugs. Phil, yeah, he was on drugs. He was a cocaine addict. Sherlock Holmes was the character, and O'Connell actually wrote it. O'Connell was a drug addict, so of course he had to put Sherlock Holmes on drugs too. Joe, I don't think drugs are as bad as tobacco. I think tobacco is the worst thing on earth. Phil, I agree with you. It killed my father. He was a chain smoker. He was an old cowboy, and he would roll his own. He came from Terre Haute, Indiana, but he spent most of his life in Texas and New Mexico. He was a car salesman, and all of his customers were cowboys. He was a cowboy himself. He was a great rider. He had a horse called Big Red that could jump a 10-foot fence. He was in the Army Cavalry. He died in 1963 from smoking. He kept smoking cigarettes all his life. He rolled his own and smoked them and finally got heart trouble, then died. Joe, well, I think tobacco is one of the worst things there is. It kills 400,000 a year at least. Phil, oh yeah, at least it's gone way down because the young people don't smoke like they used to. When I was growing up, everybody smoked except for me. How they were making tobacco, they didn't do it the way they used to. They take the whole stalk, like the stem and everything, and they throw it in the shaker and shake the stuff off it and grind it all up. Then they run it like newspaper through rollers. They save the juice that's squeezed out, take shredded newspaper and add the juice back to the level needed. They have stuff in barrels from Turkey that is also added. They call it deer tongue. Then they spray it with petroleum so it won't go off. Then they flavor it with brown sugar to make it sweet. These people don't even know what they're getting. Phil, no, they're getting a big mixture of poisons. Joe, every bug in the world avoids tobacco, but when commercial poisons don't work, they just add another one and another one. They have 4 or 5 poisons in them. Phil, sure, it's a conglomeration of 50 or 60 poisons. Joe, and all these bugs can build up an immunity to the stuff. Phil, it's really bad to inhale cigarettes. Cigars are not so bad because they're pretty natural. They just take the tobacco and roll it up, but even that is not right anymore because now they spray the tobacco with chemicals. The FDA said they had to quit the spraying of tobacco because the insecticides are ruining the biological controls. The insecticide business have been done in by people like me. It's all biologically controlled stuff. Joe, what about mad cow? Do you just think it's just a mineral deficiency? Phil, it's parathion poisoning. The cure for the warble fly was to take parathion and rub it into the wounds. Think how stupid that is. Parathion is a sensoid, which means your nervous system goes kaput. Sensoid is the chemical that keeps your nerve endings working. So if you foul up your sensoids, you become a nervous wreck. Someday they'll learn about Parkinson's disease with these people. It's probably from messed up sensatorids from smoking. Joe, I'll get you some paperwork. I met Dr. Joel Wallach. He wrote Dead Doctors Don't Lie. He was a veterinarian who wrote, if I treated people the way the doctors taught me to treat them as a medical doctor, I would be out of business. If you couldn't treat arthritis and you couldn't treat Alzheimer's in a cow, the cow is unable to access medicinal food. I do real good with the animals that I treat. He's done a paper on Alzheimer's, and he's getting me a copy. I'm getting to be slow on memory. Sure, I am too, Phil says. Joe, sometimes I'll get out driving and go right past the place where I'm supposed to go, and I'm thinking about something else. Phil, you're thinking about something else is why. Joe, but I am getting slower. I had heart problems, and they put 2 stents in me. They cut me open and put them in there. The doctor said I had a heart that was young as hell, but it was just blocked off, and that's the way I'm eating. But I think if I had enough paramagnetics in me, I don't think I would have ever had heart trouble. Phil, that's right. What I think you need to do if you have heart trouble is to start taking a teaspoon of paramagnetic dust every day, and that would get rid of it. Put it in your orange juice. Joe, should it be really finely ground magnetite or should it be just coerced stuff? Phil, it's better coerced stuff, really, because it's more like an antenna, but it doesn't make that much difference. On the CGS meter, it might be a difference of 1 CGS or something like that, but not different to make that much difference. Joe, well, I've got that 19,000 stuff. I don't think it will hurt me. Phil, no. It would cure your heart trouble, but put it in your orange juice. It goes good in orange juice. Joe, I don't think I ever told you about this, but I made some solar stills from distilling water, for distilling water. I put magnetic iron oxide in the bottom of the stills. After a year or two, the calcium will form on the iron. You take it out, pour little vinegar over it, clean it up, then put it right back in. With these little tiny points sticking up in the air, and when the sun shines in the water, the vapor seems to break and you can get twice as much water. Phil, sure, you have an ultrasonic condition taking place. When I start running the water, the birds nearby start talking and singing because the ultrasonics comes from the water. Parrot owners don't like that, don't know about that. Some parrots will talk once in a while just to imitate sounds, but you can get a parrot to talk a blue streak by taking some ultrasonics near it. Birds hear by ultrasonics, Joe. Now, if you take a disc with lots of quartz and a little electricity and put it in water, the water will broadcast it through the room. Phil, when you turn a faucet on, it's ultrasonically dynamic because the water runs past a metal faucet, which creates a lot of ultrasonics. If you take the bird in the bathroom and turn the faucet on, it will start talking. Joe, if you take the water and iron oxide tape, like an audio videotape, and you record the water, you have the frequencies. If you play that for the bird, it would do the same thing, wouldn't it? Phil, yeah, it would make the bird sing all day long. I'm going to end it here on page 33. I'm getting really tired. I'm going to go eat some breakfast and get ready for work. So I'll upload part 2 of this another day. Thank you all. Have a great day.